All right, here we go. Period two key concepts. A little bit more review for the final. I'm going to do the best I can here. Was up a little late last night. Got hooked on the West Wing. Netflix is going to be the death of me. Can't believe I haven't watched West Wing. Highly recommend it. Completely digressing, but here we go. All right, so our first key concept is Europeans are going to develop a variety of colonization and migration patterns. It's going to be influenced by the different goals, the cultures, where they settle, all those kind of things. But we're going to start to see competition between the European settlers and the Native Americans for resources. All right, we're going to see that the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the British are all going to be a little bit different in the way they interact with the Native Americans. We actually talked quite a bit about this, but it should be a good reminder. All right. The Spanish were very, very physical, very fierce. All right, all these things that we talked about actually in period one in the last review, the encomienda system, the casta system, forced assimilation, and then Native American labor, which sooner or later is going to be replaced by African slavery. We discussed this in depth in the period one review, so I'm going to move on. All right, the French and the Dutch were a lot different, especially the French. Okay, the French are going to send in Jesuit missionaries to convert the natives. They're going to try to create working relationships. They're going to set up trade routes. The Jesuits are going to learn the languages and the cultures of the Native Americans. Very different than the Spanish and later the English. The French fur traders are going to intermarry with the Indians. It's going to help form better alliances. The Dutch are going to be allied with the Iroquois. The French are going to be against the Iroquois. All right, so both the Europeans and the Native American tribes are going to try to play off different tribes in different countries against each other. All right, the Dutch are going to take land and trading network from the Algonquians. How's that? It's probably not close to right, but go with it. All right, who are going to strike back? They're going to almost wipe out the Dutch. They're going to then ally with the Mohawks to strike back. Then the Iroquois are going to ally with the French for a while. Basically, we have the Game of Thrones in 1600s. And if I did this a little bit better, I could intersperse a really cool scene of like a big war from Game of Thrones, but I'm not good enough to do that yet. All right, so English are going to focus on settling colonies. Very different than the French, who are going to set up trade routes, right? All right, the Pilgrims and the Puritans are going to come. They're going to come to establish their own churches. They're going to acquire substantial amounts of land for farming. All right, the Pilgrims, when we think Pilgrims, we need to think separatists. All right, William Bradford, there's where we get the story of Thanksgiving. Those are the Pilgrims. The Puritans are different. The Puritans are John Winthrop, the city upon a hill, and the errand into the wilderness, and all those things, that American exceptionalism we talked about. The idea of predestination, all right, conversion experience, and these radical conversions into the Puritan way of life. Roger Williams, Anne Hutchinson, the English Civil War and how that affected the Puritans, the Halfway Covenant, the Salem witch trials, all of that is the Puritans. So it's kind of funny that when we think of the settlers, a lot of times we think of the Pilgrims. In reality, most of the stuff that we've talked about in the history were more the Puritans, which are different. All right, Jamestown's going to attract settlers for many reasons. The profits from tobacco, which we'll talk about. They have self-government, the House of Burgesses, which is going to be really important, right? That first self-governing body in the New World. And then they also employed the headright system, all right, which is going to offer them the chance to grow wealthy. Remember, people that they pay for people to come over. In return, they're going to get land as well as service from the indentured servants. Pennsylvania is going to offer land. They're also going to offer religious toleration, all right, which is very different than a lot of the other colonies. Maryland is going to be a Catholic refugee, even though Protestants are going to outnumber the Catholics, and there's going to be a rejection of the Act of Toleration, which is going to be passed to try to secure the rights of Catholics to practice. It's still going to be the number one area for Catholics to go. All right, Rhode Island offers religious toleration. Remember, that's where what Williams fled to kind of form his own colony and allow basically any religion within reason to be practiced. Okay, Rhode Island, remember, was Rogue's Island, that island in the midst of this perfect world set up by the city upon the hill. All right. The British colonies are going to develop along the Atlantic coast. Again, there's going to be differences that are reflected environmentally, economically, culturally, as well as demographic factors, okay? So when we talk about the Chesapeake, the North Carolina colonies, remember we're talking south, they grew prosperous, they exported tobacco, all right, but you need a lot of labor for tobacco, all right, which is initially cultivated by the indentured servants, then by the Africans, all right? Tobacco farming, remember, is developed by Rolfe. All right, he sneaks in those tobacco seeds, even though the tobacco trade at the time was dominated and really tried to be controlled by the Spanish. All right, headright system is going to bring over thousands of people who are going to be indentured servants. All right. Over time, however, tobacco is going to be overproduced, which is obviously going to bring the prices down. There's going to be times when that salutary neglect is going to end, and there's going to be an attempt to enforce, like the Navigation Acts, which is also going to bring the price down. And over time, they're going to lose land and profits, right? They're going to lose the ability to bring in indentured servants, which is going to hurt their workforce. Remember that the soil is really, really depleted by tobacco, so we have that soil exhaustion. So over time, tobacco is not going to be as effective. That's why we're going to see a switch to other products. All right, Bacon's Rebellion, remember, rebellion of indentured servants, freed indentured servants. All right, and that's going to be the catalyst to them looking to a new type of labor. And in this case, it was the African slaves. All right, plus tobacco, you need a lot of land for tobacco. All right, so although we talk about the southern colonies as being prosperous because of the amount of tobacco that was produced, really because you needed so much land, that was a really small amount of people who were able to profit from that. So what we end up getting in the South, and this is really long-term important, is because we have these big fields, all right, we have few towns that develop in the South, and they're really kind of widespread, and you know, we're going to see very different in the North. All right, the New England colonies are religious colonies. All right, the Puritans set them up originally to create that city upon a hill, that American exceptionalism. All right, land is evenly distributed because all male settlers, let's not be crazy and think that we're going to get female equality, but all male settlers were supposed to be treated equally. Puritans tended to move as church communities, all right? Laws required them to live close together. You needed to be around churches, you needed to be around schools. The laws were enforced based on the Bible, and because of that, we get a national covenant that really discourages tolerance of other religions. It discourages diversity, and we get that Puritan way of life. New England's going to grow corn and beans. They're going to fish. They're going to sell that to the South and the Caribbean colonies. New England's going to buy molasses from the South and make rum, and they're going to trade, all right? So over time, New England is going to be a trading set of colonies, all right? And that's going to build them into a shipping power. All right, in between those, we have the middle colonies, all right? Different, okay? We're going to talk about them as the breadbasket. New York's going to, obviously, we talked about, begin as New Amsterdam. Lots of different ethnic groups in there because it's controlled by the Dutch. We actually get the first Jewish community in America in New Amsterdam. Pennsylvania was Quaker. All right, remember the Quakers are about pacifism. All right, this idea of an inner light and welcoming to everybody. Sometimes you hear people talk about the Quakers as the first hippies. And they treated Indians relatively fairly because of that whole idea of that inner light and let's all love each other. All right, over time, the Quakers are going to be outnumbered by other settler groups, and that great, good, at least decent treatment of the Native Americans is going to end. All right, Scots, Irish, and Germans are going to migrate to Pennsylvania in large numbers. And the middle colonies, again, were the breadbasket. They heavily focused on wheat, all right, and they're going to remain pretty diverse and tolerant throughout their existence. All right. When we go way down south, really South Carolina and Georgia, all right, originally those are based on rice and indigo. Later on, that's going to be the first place we're going to see cotton. Remember, the Caribbean colonies are going to grow sugar. All right, the Caribbean is a place to grow sugar. Sugar is a big money maker. All right, they can make all kinds of money on that. They need food. They don't want to waste the land in the Caribbean to grow food. All right, so South Carolina and Georgia are going to be used a little bit to grow that food and then send that back out to the Caribbean colonies. All right, because they have this relationship with the Caribbeans, and the Caribbean colonies are kind of switched back and forth originally between the Portuguese and the Spanish. They're going to use Portuguese-based slavery. It's kind of what we think of when we think of slavery in the South, all right? Much more cruel, destructive of human dignity, all right? Sugar profits were so high, and the supply of slaves was so high and so cheap that they basically felt it was okay just to work their slaves to death and then buy more, all right? It's a very inhumane style of slavery. Not that any slavery style is humane, but even more cruel and destructive than what we're going to see in a lot of the other areas. All right. African slaves are going to be converted to Christianity, but quite often we're going to get this kind of meld between Christianity and the African tradition. So we're going to get new religions that come out of that. Santeria comes out of that, and that's where voodoo comes from. It's kind of a combination between African religious cultures and Christianity. Okay, because of the lax attention of Britain. All right, distance is a long way away. Obviously, we get the salutary neglect throughout this time. The colonies are going to get used to governing themselves. All right, the first example is the House of Burgesses. All right, but most other colonies are going to follow their example. All right, most places are going to base the ability to vote on owning property. Massachusetts is a little different. Again, that's that Puritan colony. All right, so you had to be a member of the church to vote, but for the most part, if you own property, you could vote. New England town meetings allowed most white males to participate in making laws. All right, they had even broader ability to vote. All right, in the South, it's a little bit different. You have that planter class, and we already talked about how you need those big farms of tobacco to make money. So we have this planter upper class. All right, so they usually required substantial property to vote or hold office. Okay, a smaller democracy, but it's still some sort of democracy. All right. Um, Salutary neglect is going to allow American colonies to control the process. They're going to control taxation. All right. Every once in a while, we're going to get British efforts to reassert control. We talked about this. All right. Ignore, do what we tell you, ignore, do what we tell you, ignore, do what we tell you. It's not going to work. All right. So the Navigation Acts are going to be an attempt to reassert control. Okay. Largely ignored, a lot of smuggling, a lot of resistance. All right. Then we're going to get the Dominion of New England, where the king says, these colonies are mine and they need to listen to me, and blah, 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 blah. Doesn't work very well either. Glorious Revolution is going to bring a new attempt to control the colonies. Again, it's not going to work, or we're going to see significant protests against the attempt by England to control the colonies. All right. Okay, so we're going to get this combination of Columbian exchange with Europe and in England and in the New World. So it's going to affect a number of different areas, all right? And we're going to get competition over resources, not only between the Europeans and the Native Americans, but also between the European countries themselves. All right, so mercantilism, remember that term? That's an important term. The whole idea is colonies export raw materials. The mother country sells back to them the finished goods. So the colonies provide both the raw materials as well as the market to sell back finished goods. Remember, the whole idea of mercantilism, colonies are about making money. All right, England is going to be a mercantilist nation. So if the colonies aren't making them money, it makes sense then that they need to do something to change that so they are making them money. All right, so the Navigation Act said you could only trade with the British. Again, from the British point of view, under mercantilism, it makes sense. All right, the colonies are there to make money for the mother country. Why should they trade with France or with the Dutch or anyone else? Are going to go to war to try to seize control of the slave trade. Later on, the British are going to try to seize control of the slave trade. And then very quickly, the British are actually going to turn pretty anti-slavery, and over time will become the biggest anti-slavery group of any nation. All right. Again, sugar is a main source of profits. You can make a lot of money against that. The British are going to fight numerous wars, including a major one against the Dutch, where they're going to seize New Amsterdam, which will then become New York. The whole idea behind that is enforcing this idea of mercantilism. All right. But we are going to see significant exports to England as well as to other European countries. New England's going to export both food and rum. The middle colonies are going to export wheat. They're going to make more. Remember, we talked about that as the breadbasket. All right. And the Chesapeake are going to export tobacco. All right. We're also going to get some other things that are exported: timber, rice, indigo. And later on, we're going to get cotton. Remember, cotton doesn't come right away. Cotton comes down the road. All right. We're going to see a continued trade both in and out of the American Indian communities. All right. And that's going to stimulate trade. All right. There's going to be a lot of value in European trade goods. All right. So therefore, Native Americans are going to war among themselves in order to control the trade with the European colonies. All right. They are bringing things in that the Native Americans want. All right. The fur trade, although originally was set up with the French and had a pretty amicable relationship, over time it's going to cause massive environmental damage. So many beavers are going to be slaughtered for their furs that it's going to ruin lake and wetland environments. All right, you know, we know this today, that there's a pretty fragile balance of nature, and when you take out one aspect of nature, like really happened with the beaver, it messes up a lot of different things. Okay. So much so that there were actually wars over this, okay? They were called the Beaver Wars. All right, the Iroquois Confederation repeatedly went to war with other Native American tribes in order to keep control of the fur trade. All right, their neighbors are going to have to move. All right, and then over time, we're actually going to have to capture replacements for long lost tribe members. So there would be a war, and then there would be another war to try to capture new tribe members and bring in. Those were called mourning wars, and those got more and more common, especially as Native American tribes' numbers shrunk due to both the warfare as well as disease. All right. So again, diseases are going to be spread by traders. The French fur trappers spread the diseases way into the North American interior, obviously not really intentionally. All right, but as more and more people die, it's going to force Native American tribes to remake themselves, to combine, to try to forge new identities and new ways to survive. That's called tribalization. So that's a word we really didn't talk about, but tribalization is really this attempt of multiple, sometimes, Native American tribes that are forced to combine due to loss of a number of members, usually by disease, but also sometimes warfare. All right. So we're going to see serious conflicts between all levels, French, Dutch, British, and the Spanish, with armed American Indian groups. So just some examples. The Puritans are going to raise the Pequot War, which is basically going to wipe out many of the Native Americans in Connecticut to allow them to seize their land. All right, we're going to get a number of attacks. We had the whole John Smith, Pocahontas, Powhatan, John Rolfe story. Again, please don't listen to the Disney's Pocahontas. Not true. All right, as well as some significant effects by Okanako. I'm not even going to try. I got nothing. Sorry, guys. Where he was raiding and attacking European settlements. All right, there were groups of Native American tribes who understood, kind of could see what was happening here, and did fight back rather fiercely. All right, the Bacon's Rebellion, again, remember Bacon's Rebellion, although we talk about it as the spur to African slavery, which it was originally started over this border between Native Americans and the new indentured servants as they moved west trying to find new land after they were freed. And the idea from the indentured servants that they weren't being protected from Native American raids. That's what starts the rebellion. Long term is the turn to African slavery, but realize that it was a Native American conflict that kind of kicks off the rebellion. All right, we've talked about King Philip's War and Metacom trying to drive the English back into the sea to just get rid of the English. He has some successes early, all right, but not only do the English fight back, but they also are able to ally with some Native American groups who see this as an opportunity to gain strength against Metacom. All right. We're also going to see King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, are all wars between the French and the British where Native Americans were on both sides. So we had Native Americans fighting other Native Americans. We had Native Americans fighting Europeans. We had Europeans fighting Europeans. So there is a lot of conflict, obviously, during this time period. All right. George Washington goes into the Ohio Valley in 1754. We have Native Americans, again, on both sides. All right. And they're on both sides because they're trying to do what's best for them. All right. So they're playing their own political games as well as the Europeans are. All right. Obviously, George Washington's expedition kicks off the French and Indian War. Native Americans are forced to take sides. Most of them join with the French, though there are some examples of Native American tribes that join with the British. All right. But in the end, the British win this war and drive the French out of North America. All right. Meanwhile, in the south, the Spanish had conquered the Aztecs. They would ally with other tribes to help them conquer the Aztecs. And then after they conquered the Aztecs, they'd turn and they'd conquer the tribes that they allied with. So the Spanish are going to take the south, whereas over time, obviously, the British are going to take the north. European leaders and colonists are going to diverge. All right, so there's going to be what's best for the Europeans and then what's best for the colonists. And as those differ, that's going to lead to mistrust on both sides of the Atlantic, and it's going to lead to a lot of conflict. So King James is going to take over Virginia as a royal colony. He's going to try to abolish the House of Burgesses, right? Get rid of this. I'm in charge. None more of this democracy stuff, all right? But the royal governor he puts in charge figures out he can't rule without the House of Burgesses. Everything was centered around this democratic style, all right? So the House of Burgesses end up being reinstated, and we have this continual conflict between the monarchy and the democratic institutions that we have in the New World, all right? Lord Baltimore founds Maryland, remember, as a Catholic colony, but over time, Protestants outweigh the Catholics, all right? The Catholics are going to try to codify, to put into law their freedom, all right? So we're going to get the Act of Toleration, which then later will be dismissed, So we have that conflict there. All right, New England is unhappy with the Navigation Acts. They're unhappy with Oliver Cromwell for not recognizing the exceptionalism of the New England colonies, that whole concept of city on the hill. And that smuggling and bribery and all the things that go on there are going to go on all the way up until the Revolutionary War itself. All right. You have the Western lands. Different colonies are going to claim different land. And oftentimes different British kings, because we go through a number of British kings in a relatively short time period here, are going to grant those Western lands to different colonies. So that's going to create, obviously, some significant problems. All right. Bacon's Rebellion is really, again, about that, not those indentured servants not feeling protected from the Native American tribes. They're going to go and demand to be protected by the royal governor, Berkeley. King James II is going to try to take away self-government in New England with the Dominion of New England. Obviously, that's not going to work too. So, big picture here, what we have is we have the monarchy and we have democratic institutions in the New World. And obviously, there's going to be conflict with those, okay? The king is like, do what I say, and because of the salutary neglect, the New World had gotten used to this idea of democracy. Why do we say what you say? Why do we have to do what you say? We'll do what we think's best for us. And that conflict is really going to continue to grow over time. All right. More military conflicts. We've talked about all these, but the only one we really didn't talk about was the Paxton Boys, which was, again, these Native American raids were happening on the frontier. All right, so it was a vigilante group that formed after the French and Indian War and Pontiac's Rebellion. The problem is they didn't just protect or fight back. They started to commit atrocities. The biggest one was called the massacre at Conestoga, where they went in and just killed everybody, men, women, children, Native American tribes, and killed them all. Native Americans of a tribe, excuse me, killed them all. All right, and that's going to obviously cause some issues as well. We are going to start to see some assimilation both ways, right? We talked about, for example, with the Africans, how the Africans combine Christianity and their own cultures to form new religions and new ideas like Santeria and Voodoo. All right, we're going to see that Christianity, especially in the Spanish South, is going to be a major factor. All right, but they are going to start to take on some aspects of the tradition of the Native Americans in the South. So Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a famous shrine, was all about a young girl who saw Mary, supposedly, and saw Mary as a brown woman. And the fact that that was enshrined in Mexican culture and enshrined in really the Christian church itself is part of that assimilation. The Day of the Dead, which is obviously still celebrated, is from Mayan tradition originally. So we see that become part of this new kind of Spanish / Native American culture. All right. There's a folk saint called Saint Simon, San Simon, probably, who is venerated by the Mayan people in several towns in Guatemala. All right, not approved from the Roman Catholic Church, but another example of kind of this blending of the Spanish culture and the Native American culture. All right, and again, remember, the Native Americans aren't just going to lay down in the South either. Probably the biggest revolt is the Pueblo Revolt or Pope's Revolt, where Native Americans are, in the end, allowed to maintain their own territory. It cuts down on the forced assimilation. Now, again, over time, that territory is going to get conquered as well. All right, but it does significantly slow down the conquering of territory. All right, we're going to get these really interesting kind of dichotomy where, because the British colonies are going to participate in the political, social, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain, they're going to feel more British, but on the other hand, they're also going to resist British control. All right, and that's going to become a significant issue. All right, so we're going to see some problems both within the colonies as well as between the colonies in Europe. All right, so for example, we're going to get significant Puritan hostility towards the Quakers and the Catholics. All right, in their mind, they left England so they could form this city on the hill, this perfect society. And as the Quakers and the Catholics, they are forced to relate with them. That doesn't make them very happy. All right, we know that Roger Williams had kind of his own idea of Puritanism, didn't feel it was fair the way that they were treating the Native Americans, so he's banished and he goes and creates Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson is going to be put on trial for heresy. She rejects this idea of patriarchy, of men always being in charge. She becomes very, very different. She points out kind of the problems with the Puritan religion. So she's actually kicked out. She flees to Rhode Island, and as we know, she actually ends up with her and her family getting killed in an Indian attack. All right, we get the Quakers in Pennsylvania. All right, we get the Great Awakening. We spent a fair amount of time talking about the Great Awakening, and George Whitefield. I think it's Whitfield actually, takes the Edwards idea of brimstone and hellfire. Remember, John Edwards had the passage that we read, the sermon that we read called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. All right, and that's going to set up conflicts between the old lights and the new lights. The idea of those that believed in kind of the old style of religion and this new kind of fire and brimstone. All right, we're going to get churches set up. We're going to get colleges set up. Most of the Ivy League schools are founded at this time. We're going to get the foundation of the Baptists and the Methodists are all going to come out of the Great Awakening. All right, we're also going to bring the Enlightenment to America, especially through books. All right, and then we talked about deism, this idea that God created the world and then basically left and does not have everyday control or everyday influence on it anymore. All right. Over time, the colonies are going to experience Anglicization. All right, they're going to develop their own political communities based on English models. All right, we're going to see the spread of Protestantism. We're going to see a transatlantic culture, right? Books and things going back and forth. All right, most colonies in the end are going to be royal colonies. The Church of England will become standard, the Anglican Church. However, we are going to continue to see representative assemblies. This idea of democracy isn't going to go away, but they're going to supposedly report to the royal governors because now they become royal colonies. All right. The upper classes are going to model their lives after the upper classes in Great Britain. All right. Their houses are going to look that way. They're going to dress that way. Their carriages, their music, the books that they read, the education that they give their kids are all modeled on the upper classes of Great Britain. Currency is tied to Great Britain. All right. Trading networks are tied into Great Britain, so there's this very close connection to Great Britain. All right, now, one of the big things that happens with the Enlightenment, guys, is we're going to also see books, the Enlightenment books are going to spread anti-authoritarianism. All right, and that's going to help lay the groundwork for the revolution. For example, John Locke. All right, remember, Locke says government's created to protect their life, liberty, and property, and protect the rights of the people. And if a government fails to protect those rights, the people have the right to revolt and create their own government. That's Locke. All right, and that's really what happens in the revolution. It's why we're going to see the Declaration of Independence be very Lockean, right? It could have been written by Locke. It wasn't. Don't confuse that. All right. So over time, the British government's going to attempt to incorporate its North American colonies into its imperial structure. All right. Again, mercantilism is still a major, major idea here. The colonies are supposed to make the British government money, and they're not, and that's a problem. All right. So we're going to get all these things that we've really talked about already. All right. But again, we go salutary neglect to significant enforcement, to salutary neglect to significant enforcement, and over time, that's going to lead to the revolution. All right. So as we start to get this attempt by the British to maintain control, the colonies are going to be like, screw that, all right? They've had this experience of self-government, and they're not ready to give it up. They've had this experience of religious independence. They're not ready to give it up, all right? They think the English government's corrupt. They think the monarchy is corrupt, and they're not giving up their independence, all right? So even though at this time there's obviously no talk of independence from Europe, really, there is this idea that the colonies need to be a little bit independent. All right, so they have their own tradition of running their own affairs. They believe that they have political independence. All right, they believe that they should have religious independence. All right, and that all is going to be a significant effect on leading up to the revolution here. Okay, Locke's theory is going to encourage governments to believe they are the font of political power. The people are what gives you power. All right, not blood like a monarchy, which says that, you know, if it's handed down blood, God chose you to be king. All right, so we're going to start to see the English crack down and the Americans say no way. All right, slavery is obviously going to be a significant effect. All right, and that's going to become a major, major part of the colonial structure. All right. Every colony has slavery. Don't get that wrong, okay? It's not like only the South has slavery. There was slavery in the middle colonies. There was slavery in the New England colonies, all right? Now, in the northern colonies and New England colonies, there really was an economic need, so it didn't spread as fast, and there weren't as many as in the southern colonies, but they were there, all right? The New England colonies took part in the slave trade, even if they weren't really actively involved in slave trading, all right? Remember that triangle that we talked about, all right, them trading rum, buying molasses, transporting slaves to Europe, from Africa to the New World. A lot of the New England traders were involved in that triangle. All right, so they're there. However, the Chesapeake, South Carolina, Georgia colonies, that's where slavery is going to really grow. And again, it's an economic growth. That's where they needed it for sugar, tobacco, and later cotton. All right. As slavery becomes the dominant labor system, you have to create laws, those black codes that we talked about, all right, to make sure that we clearly define slavery. We clearly define that slaves will be slaves forever. Their kids are slaves. There's no idea of being born free to a slave. All right. So we get a number of different laws that we have here from a slave being a slave no matter what, depending on the mother. If the mother's a slave, the kid's a slave. Murder by a slave of a slave by their owner in 1669 was made not punishable by law. By 1705, Virginia made all Africans by definition slaves. All right, we're going to get a lot of other laws that were passed. This whole idea of black codes, but an attempt to control the growing slave population. All right, now obviously the slaves aren't going to just say, yes, enslave us. All right, there's going to be significant resistance. We talked a lot about the Stono Rebellion, which was the major slave rebellion prior to the Revolutionary War. Didn't succeed, all right, but it was a significant rebellion. We're going to see passive resistance very commonly, either working slowly, working poorly, accidentally breaking things. All right, we're going to see the beginning of attempting to pass on family names, family traditions, family knowledge, all right, trying to maintain a culture. All right, the African slaves wanted to maintain their culture even in this bondage that they found themselves in. All right, and we're going to see a lot of different things passed down: African hairstyles, pottery, carving, house designs, musical instruments, the music, Muslim beliefs are all going to be passed down. And over time, because of the breakup of the family, we're going to start to see what's called fictive kingship. All right, where older slaves were called aunts and uncles. All right, this idea that even if you're not related to me by blood, all right, we can still be kin. All right, and that's going to be handed down over time as well. That's period 2, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I mispronounced a ton of words. Deal, guys. I'm doing my best. Enjoy the rest of your break.